It was a quiet evening in the small African village of Nkabia, where the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden light across the vast savanna. Beneath the ancient baobab tree, the villagers gathered for the annual harvest festival, a night filled with dancing, laughter, and music. For generations, this tree had been a silent witness to the community's joys and sorrows. But that night, it held a secret that would haunt the village for years to come. The Aduel family was among the most respected in the village. Quaim, the head of the family, was known for his strong moral values and leadership. His wife, Amma, was revered for her wisdom and kindness. Their children, Kofi, the eldest son, and little Nia, the youngest, were the pride of their parents. The family was a cornerstone of the village, their unity and love admired by all. As the music played and lanterns illuminated the festivities, 7-year-old Nia ran among the crowd, her laughter ringing out like a bell. Dressed in a bright red dress sewn by her mother, she was the picture of innocence. Her boundless energy and radiant smile made her a favorite among the villagers, who often joked that Nia carried the sun in her heart. Kofi, at 16, tried to keep an eye on his younger sister while juggling his desire to join his friends. "Stay where I can see you, Nia," he called, half laughing as she darted away to chase a group of fireflies. Nia turned back briefly, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I'm just playing, Kofi. Don't worry about me." But as the night deepened and the festival reached its peak, Nia's presence began to fade into the background of the lively crowd. At first, no one noticed her absence. The villagers assumed she was playing near the baobab or chasing fireflies with the other children. It wasn't until Amma called for her daughter, expecting her bright laughter to answer back, that the unsettling silence crept in. "Nia." Amma's voice cut through the chatter, tinged with a mother's instinctive worry. She scanned the crowd, her heart pounding as she realized she couldn't see the red dress anywhere. "Kofi, have you seen your sister?" Kofi's stomach dropped. "She was just here," he stammered, his eyes darting frantically across the sea of faces. A wave of dread washed over him as he realized how much time had passed since he last saw her. Panic spread quickly through the festival as word of Nia's disappearance rippled through the villagers. Torches were lit, their flames casting flickering shadows as the crowd organized a search. Men and women called her name into the night, their voices growing more desperate with each unanswered cry. The baobab tree, tall and imposing, stood as if guarding its secrets. Its massive trunk and sprawling roots seemed to stretch endlessly into the earth, and its thick branches swayed gently in the night breeze. Despite the frantic search, no one saw Nia again. The villagers combed through the surrounding fields, peered into wells, and checked every corner of the village, but there was no sign of her. Amma clung to Quaim, her sobs racking her body as she whispered, "She can't be gone. Not my baby. She can't be gone." Quaim, though stoic by nature, felt his own composure crumble. He held his wife tightly, his face a mask of anguish. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. The villagers whispered among themselves as the hours dragged on. Some spoke of curses, others of restless spirits drawn to the child's innocence. The baobab, revered and feared in equal measure, became the focal point of their speculation. "Perhaps the tree took her," an elderly woman murmured, her voice quivering. "It has seen too much, and now it demands something in return." By dawn, hope had turned to despair. The villagers gathered around the Aduel family, their faces etched with grief and helplessness. Amma knelt beneath the baobab, her hands clawing at the earth, as if she could pull her daughter back from its roots. Kofi stood frozen nearby, his guilt pressing down on him like a physical weight. He had promised to watch her, and he had failed. Quaim, his voice hoarse from hours of calling Nia's name, addressed the crowd. "Thank you," he said, his tone hollow. Thank you for helping us search. But now we must accept what we cannot change." The villagers dispersed slowly, their heads bowed. But the shadow of that night lingered, casting a pall over the village for years to come. The baobab, once a symbol of life and community, now stood as a reminder of loss and unanswered questions. The Aduel family was left to grapple with a grief that time could not erase, and the mystery of Nea's disappearance became an unspoken wound in the heart of Nkabia. For 12 years, the baobab tree remained silent, its secrets locked within its ancient roots. But for the Aduels, every rustle of its leaves and every shadow cast by its branches was a painful reminder of the daughter they had lost and the hope they could not let go of. 12 years passed, but the pain of Nea's disappearance never faded. It lingered like an unwelcome guest, settling into every corner of the Aduel home. The laughter that once echoed through their walls had long since quieted, replaced by heavy silences and unspoken regrets. Quaim, once a confident and charismatic leader in the community, had grown quieter with each passing year. His booming laughter, once a source of joy for the village, was now a rare sound. He spent his days tending the farm with a mechanical precision, his mind often wandering to memories of his youngest daughter. Each crack of the plow against the earth seemed to echo with questions he dared not voice. Did I fail her? Was there something I missed? He often found himself standing by the baobab tree in the evenings, his calloused hands brushing its ancient bark. It had become a ritual of sorts, a silent conversation with the only witness to that terrible night. The tree, with its gnarled roots and sprawling branches, seemed to mock him with its steadfastness. It had stood through storms and droughts, while he felt himself crumbling under the weight of his guilt. Amma, on the other hand, threw herself into her community work, a fragile attempt to outrun her grief. She became the village healer, offering remedies for fevers and soothing words for restless spirits. But even as she poured her energy into helping others, her own wounds remained raw. Every morning, she laid out an extra plate at breakfast, a small act of defiance against the cruel reality that Nea would never sit at the table again. In the quiet moments, when the house was still, Amma would pull out the little red dress Nea had worn the night she disappeared. The fabric was worn and faded now, but Amma clung to it like a lifeline. She often pressed it to her face, hoping to catch even the faintest trace of her daughter's scent. But all she ever smelled was time, cruel and unrelenting. Kofi, now 25, carried a different kind of burden. On the night of Nea's disappearance, he had been tasked with watching her. But his attention had been elsewhere, drawn to the laughter of his friends and the allure of a girl he hoped to impress. That moment of distraction had haunted him ever since, replaying in his mind like a broken record. If only I had stayed with her. If only I had held her hand tighter. He avoided the baobab tree, unable to face the memories it held. Instead, he spent his days working tirelessly, as if physical exhaustion could drown out the voices of guilt that whispered to him at night. But no matter how hard he worked, the guilt remained, a shadow that followed him wherever he went. Despite their pain, life in Kabia went on. The village buzzed with activity, the rhythm of everyday life, undisturbed by the tragedy that had defined the Aduel's existence. Children played near the baobab tree, their laughter ringing out like a cruel reminder of what the Aduels had lost. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, their pitying glances a constant thorn in the family's side. Then one crisp morning, as the sun painted the horizon in hues of gold, a letter arrived at the Aduel family's doorstep. Amma was the first to see it, a simple envelope resting against the worn wooden door. Her heart clenched as she picked it up, the coarse texture of the paper sending a shiver down her spine. "What is it?" Quaim asked, his voice heavy with caution as he stepped into the room. Amma handed him the envelope without a word, her hands trembling. Quaim studied the envelope, noting the absence of a return address or any markings. He opened it slowly, as if afraid of what it might contain. Inside was a single piece of paper, the handwriting hurried and uneven. "I know what happened to Nea. Come to the baobab tree tonight, alone." The words hit them like a thunderclap. Amma clutched her chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "It's a cruel joke," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Who would do this to us? After all these years?" Kofi, who had been sitting silently in the corner, rose to his feet. He took the letter from his father, his jaw tightening as he read the message. "What if it's not a joke?" he said, his voice low but steady. "What if someone truly knows?" Amma shook her head, her voice breaking. "And what if it's a trap? We've already lost Nia. I can't lose another child." Quaim placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, though his own hands trembled. "If there's even a chance," he began, but Amma cut him off. "A chance for what? To open old wounds? To bring back more pain?" Kofi stepped forward, his eyes filled with determination. "I'll go," he said firmly. "I have to." "No," Amma said, her voice rising in desperation. "Please, Kofi, let it go." "I can't," Kofi replied, his voice tinged with both guilt and resolve. "I've carried this for 12 years. If there's a chance to find out what happened to her, I have to take it. For Nia, for us." Amma sank into a chair, her tears flowing freely. Quaim looked at his son, his face a mask of conflict. Finally, he nodded. "If you're going," he said, his voice steady but heavy, "you won't go alone." The arrival of the letter sent shockwaves through the Aidwale family. It had been 12 long years since Nia's disappearance, and though their grief had never left them, they had learned to live with its weight. But now, the carefully constructed walls around their pain began to crack. Kofi stood in the middle of the modest living room, holding the letter in trembling hands. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken fears and long-buried memories. His voice, normally steady and firm, wavered as he read the words aloud. "I know what happened to Nea. Come to the baobab tree tonight, alone." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, their meaning both tantalizing and terrifying. Alma's breath caught in her throat. She pressed a hand to her chest, her face pale as she shook her head in disbelief. "This has to be a cruel joke," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We suffered enough. Why would someone do this now?" Quaim, seated at the edge of a worn wooden chair, leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. His usually stoic expression was replaced by a deep furrow of concern. "What if it's not a joke?" he said quietly, almost to himself. "What if someone truly knows what happened?" The room fell into silence, each family member grappling with the implications of the letter. Kofi clenched his jaw, his gaze fixed on the paper, as if willing it to reveal more. He felt a spark of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. But that hope was tangled with fear, guilt, and a deep, aching need for answers. "I'll go," Kofi said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. He looked up, meeting his parents' eyes. "If there's even the slightest chance of finding out the truth, I have to take it." Emma's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. "No," she cried, her voice rising with desperation. "It's dangerous. You don't know who sent this or what their intentions are. You can't go, Kofi. I won't allow it." But Kofi was resolute. He stepped closer to his mother, his tone firm yet pleading. "Mama, I need to do this. For Nia, for us, I've carried this guilt for 12 years. I was supposed to watch her that night, and I failed. If there's even a chance to make things right, I have to try." Emma's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Kofi, you are a child. It wasn't your fault." "But it feels like it was," he said softly, his voice breaking. "Every day, I think about what I could have done differently. I can't keep living like this, Mama. I need to know what happened." Quaim, who had remained silent, finally spoke. His deep voice carried the weight of years of unspoken sorrow. "If he feels he must go, Amma, we should support him. But not alone." He turned to Kofi. "I'll come with you." "No," Kofi said firmly. "The letter says to come alone. Whoever sent this might not reveal anything if they see I've brought someone." Amma stood abruptly, her hands trembling as she gestured toward the letter. "And what if it's a trap? What if this person is waiting to harm you? We've already lost Nia. I can't lose you too." Kofi placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes filled with both determination and tenderness. "Mama, I'll be careful. I promise. But I have to go. You know I do." Amma pulled him into a tight embrace, her tears soaking into his shirt. "Please, Kofi," she whispered. "Please be safe." The day stretched on in tense silence, each family member lost in their own thoughts. Amma busied herself in the kitchen, her hands moving mechanically as she prepared a stew that no one would eat. Quain sat outside, sharpening a rusty machete, though the blade was already keen. And Kofi retreated to his room, staring at the letter over and over, as if the hastily scrawled words might somehow change. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the family gathered in the living room. The golden light bathed the room in a warm glow, but the mood was anything but comforting. Amma reached for Kofi's hand, squeezing it tightly. "Before you go," she said, her voice trembling, "let us pray." Kofi nodded, and the family knelt together on the worn rug. Amma's voice rose in fervent prayer, her words a mix of plea and desperation. "Lord, protect my son. Guide him and keep him safe from harm. Let him find the answers we seek without losing himself in the process." When she finished, Quaim added his own quiet words, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "And if there is danger, let it come to me instead. Spare my family any more pain." Kofi remained silent, his own prayer a private conversation with the sister he had lost. "Nia, if you can hear me, help me. Show me the way." As darkness fell, Kofi stood by the door, a small satchel slung over his shoulder. Amma pressed a pouch of herbs into his hand, her eyes brimming with tears. "This is for protection," she said. "Keep it close." Quain placed a firm hand on Kofi's shoulder. "You're stronger than you know," he said. "Whatever happens tonight, remember that." Kofi nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'll be back," he promised, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. He stepped out into the cool night air, the village quiet except for the distant chirping of crickets. The baobab tree loomed in the distance, its massive silhouette both familiar and foreboding. Kofi took a deep breath and began walking, each step feeling heavier than the last. As he approached the tree, the air seemed to change. It grew colder, sharper, as if charged with an unseen energy. The shadows beneath the tree stretched unnaturally long, their shapes twisting and writhing like living things. Kofi stopped a few feet away, his heart pounding in his chest. He scanned the area, searching for any sign of the letter's sender. "I'm here," he called out, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "Whoever you are, show yourself." For a moment, there was only silence. Then from the shadows, a figure emerged, a tall, cloaked form with eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. The figure's voice was low and raspy, carrying an otherworldly quality. "You've come," it said. "Good. There is much to discuss." Kofi's breath caught in his throat, but he forced himself to stand tall. "Who are you?" he demanded. "And what do you know about my sister?" The figure tilted its head, as if considering the question. "All will be revealed," it said. "But first, you must listen." That night, Kofi approached the baobab tree with a torch in hand, his footsteps heavy against the soft soil. The path leading to the ancient tree was eerily quiet, the usual chirping of crickets replaced by an oppressive silence. The air seemed to hum with an energy he couldn't quite place, as though the night itself held its breath in anticipation. Kofi's thoughts raced as he walked. The letter had ignited something within him, a blend of hope and fear he hadn't felt in years. He clung to the possibility that he might finally learn the truth about Nia, but his heart trembled at what that truth could cost. The baobab tree soon came into view, its massive silhouette dominating the landscape. Its sprawling roots twisted and curled like the fingers of an ancient giant, and its gnarled branches reached toward the heavens. Kofi slowed his pace, his torch casting flickering shadows across the ground. The closer he got, the more the air seemed to thrum, as if the tree itself were alive. At the base of the tree, Kofi noticed something strange. Fresh carvings etched into the bark. The symbols were intricate, their patterns unfamiliar, and they glowed faintly in the moonlight, as though imbued with a life of their own. He reached out to touch one, his fingers trembling, but before he could make contact, a low voice broke the silence. "You've come." Kofi spun around, his torchlight catching the edge of a shadow that moved behind the tree. His heart pounded in his chest as a figure emerged, stepping into the light. It was an old man, cloaked in tattered animal skins that hung loosely over his wiry frame. His eyes, sharp and piercing, seemed to see straight through Kofi, as if laying bare every secret he had ever kept. "Who are you?" Kofi demanded, gripping the torch tightly. His voice was steady, but his knees felt weak. "What do you know about my sister?" The man smiled grimly, his expression a mixture of knowing and sorrow. "Your family's pain is known to the spirits," he said, his voice deep and resonant, carrying the weight of centuries. "The debt of your father's past has come to claim its due." Kofi's brow furrowed. "What debt? What are you talking about?" The old man raised a hand, silencing Kofi with a simple gesture. "If you wish to know the truth about Nia, you must follow the path to the River of Echoes. There the spirits will reveal what you seek. But beware," he added, his voice lowering to a near whisper, "the truth is not without sacrifice." The word sent a chill down Kofi's spine. He opened his mouth to ask more, to demand answers, but the old man turned and disappeared into the shadows as swiftly as he had appeared. The faint scent of burning sage lingered in the air, a haunting reminder of his presence. Kofi stood frozen, his mind reeling. He stared at the spot where the man had vanished, his thoughts a chaotic tangle of questions. What debt? What sacrifice? And why had it taken 12 years for this message to come to him? The glow of the carvings on the tree seemed to pulse gently, as if urging him to move forward. He took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. Whatever lay ahead, he knew he couldn't turn back now. For Nia, for his family, he had to face whatever truth awaited him. The next morning, when Kofi returned home, the sky was tinged with the soft light of dawn. His parents were waiting for him, their faces drawn with worry. Amma rushed to his side as he entered the house, her hands clutching his arms. "What happened? Are you all right?" she asked, her voice trembling. Kofi nodded, though his expression was distant. "I met someone," he said. "An old man. He said the answers we're looking for are at the River of Echoes." Quain stiffened at the mention of the river, his jaw tightening. "The River of Echoes," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "That place is cursed." "What do you mean?" Kofi asked, his gaze snapping to his father. Quain hesitated, his eyes darting to Alma before returning to Kofi. "There are stories," he said slowly. "Stories of people who go to the river seeking answers but never return. The spirits there demand more than most can give." Alma's face paled, her grip on Kofi tightening. "You can't go there," she said firmly. "I won't allow it." "I have to," Kofi said, his voice steady but filled with quiet determination. "If there's even a chance that Niad is out there, or that we can learn what happened to her, I have to take it." Alma shook her head, tears pooling in her eyes. "You don't understand. That place, it's not just dangerous. It's evil. Please, Kofi, don't do this." But Kofi couldn't be swayed. He turned to his father, his expression pleading. "You've always told me to be strong," he said, "to fight for what's right. This is my fight now. I need to know the truth." Quain stared at his son for a long moment, his face a mask of inner conflict. Finally, he sighed heavily and nodded. "If you're going," he said, "then you won't go alone. I'll come with you." "No," Kofi said quickly. "The man said I have to go alone." He was clear about that. Quain's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Alma, however, was not so easily silenced. "And if it's a trap?" "What then? Who will protect you?" "Kofi. Who will bring you back to us?" "I'll be careful," Kofi said. "I promise." The room fell silent, the weight of the decision settling over them. Finally, Alma reached for a small pouch on the table and pressed it into Kofi's hand. "Take this," she said, her voice breaking. "It's for protection. It's all I can give you." Kofi nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you, Mama," he said softly. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Kofi stood at the edge of the village, the path to the River of Echoes stretching out before him. He glanced back at his parents, who stood in the doorway of their home, watching him with a mixture of pride and fear. "Be strong," Quain called out. "And remember, no matter what you face, you are not alone." Kofi nodded, his heart heavy but resolute. He turned and began walking, the shadows of the forest closing in around him. The journey to the river had begun, and with it, the search for answers that could either heal his family or shatter them forever. The next morning, Kofi recounted his encounter beneath the baobab tree to his parents. The air in their modest home felt thick with tension as his words settled over them. Quain, usually stoic, looked visibly shaken. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table, and a pallor washed over his face. "The River of Echoes," Quain muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. His gaze seemed distant, as though the very mention of the place stirred buried memories. Alma, sitting on the edge of her chair, clasped her hands tightly together. Her knuckles turned white as she listened, her fear mounting with each word. "We've lived with this pain for 12 years, Kofi," she said, her voice trembling. "Why now? Why must we dig into old wounds?" "Because it's not just about the past," Kofi said, his tone resolute. "It's about understanding what happened to Nia. We've all been stuck in this limbo, haunted by questions, by guilt. Maybe this is our chance to finally know the truth." Quain exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "The River of Echoes is not a place you approach lightly. There are stories." He trailed off, his words hanging in the air. "What stories?" Kofi pressed. Quain hesitated before speaking. "It said the river is a place where the spiritual world and our world meet. Those who go there seeking answers must pay a price. Some never return." Alma's eyes widened, tears pooling as she reached for Kofi's hand. "You can't go," she pleaded. "Please, Kofi, it's too dangerous." "I have to," Kofi replied, his voice soft but unwavering. "This isn't just for me, it's for all of us." Amma turned to Quaim, her desperation palpable. You can't let him do this. He's our only son now. Quaim's expression darkened. He placed a hand on Kofi's shoulder, his grip firm. If he's determined to go, he said, then we'll go with him. We'll face whatever lies ahead together. By midday, the family began their journey. Amma packed provisions, dried fruit, flatbread, and water, while Quaim sharpened his machete, its blade catching the sunlight streaming through the window. Kofi stood at the edge of their yard, staring at the dense forest that lay beyond the village. The path ahead felt like a living thing, pulsing with unseen energy. Are you ready? Quaim asked as he joined him. Kofi nodded, his resolve firm despite the knot in his stomach. As ready as I'll ever be. The family stepped onto the path together, their steps tentative but determined. The jungle closed in around them almost immediately, the thick canopy above blocking out much of the sunlight. The air was heavy with humidity, and the sound of rustling leaves and distant bird calls filled the silence. As they walked, Amma found herself gripping Kofi's arm tightly, her eyes darting to every shadow. It feels like we're being watched, she whispered. Kofi tried to reassure her, but he couldn't shake the same feeling. The jungle seemed alive in a way that was both mesmerizing and menacing. The trees, gnarled and ancient, seemed to lean toward them, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. The ground beneath their feet was uneven, and strange symbols carved into tree trunks caught their attention more than once. These markings, Quaim said, pausing to examine one. They're warnings. Warnings of what? Kofi asked, his voice hushed. That we're trespassing where we shouldn't, Quaim replied grimly. As night fell, the jungle seemed to come alive in a way that sent chills down their spines. The rustling of leaves grew louder, though there was no wind. Shadows moved at the edges of their vision, darting just out of sight. At one point, Amma stopped abruptly, her face pale. Did you hear that? She whispered. Hear what? Quaim asked, his voice steady but low. A voice, Amma said, her eyes wide. It was calling my name. Kofi exchanged a glance with his father. It's just the jungle playing tricks, he said, though he wasn't sure he believed his own words. They pressed on, their pace quickening. The path grew steeper as they climbed a hill, the dense foliage around them seeming to close in tighter. By the time they reached the top, they were breathless and drenched in sweat. But the sight before them froze them in their tracks. Below, bathed in the pale light of the moon, was the River of Echoes. Its waters shimmered unnaturally, casting an eerie glow that seemed to ripple outward. The air around the river hummed with an energy that made the hair on the back of Kofi's neck stand on end. As they descended toward the river, a mist began to rise, swirling around them in thick tendrils. It was cold, biting against their skin despite the humid air. Amma clutched Kofi's arm tighter, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Stay close, Quaim said, his voice firm but quiet. He held his machete tightly, his eyes scanning the mist for any sign of danger. When they reached the riverbank, they stopped, unsure of what to do next. The water's glow was mesmerizing, but it was the figure emerging from the mist that held their attention. It was a woman, tall and striking, her presence both captivating and unsettling. Her skin glowed faintly, and her eyes shone with an ethereal light. She moved with a grace that seemed otherworldly, her feet barely touching the ground. You seek answers, she said, her voice smooth and melodic. It carried a weight that made Amma take a step back. But the truth comes at a price. What price? Kofi asked, stepping forward despite the warning look from his father. The woman's gaze settled on him, and a faint smile curved her lips. Each of you must reveal your deepest secret, she said. Only then will the river part and reveal what you seek. Amma's hand flew to her chest, her breathing shallow. "What kind of secrets?" "The kind you've buried," the woman replied. "The kind that weigh on your soul. The river demands honesty, for only in truth can you find clarity." Kofi's heart raced. He glanced at his parents, their faces pale and strained. He had never seen such fear in their eyes, but he knew there was no turning back. "I'll go first," he said, stepping closer to the water's edge. The woman tilted her head, her glowing eyes fixed on him. "Then speak, Kofi Adwale. What secret do you carry?" The Adwale family stood at the edge of the River of Echoes, its shimmering waters casting an unearthly glow across their faces. The night air was heavy, each breath thick with the weight of unspoken fears. The woman before them, ethereal and otherworldly, radiated a quiet power that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. Her voice, smooth yet commanding, seemed to resonate within their very souls. "You each carry a secret," she said, her glowing eyes moving from one face to the next. "Unburden your hearts, and the river will reveal its truth. Refuse, and you will remain in darkness forever." The family exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of dread and uncertainty. Alma's hand trembled as she clutched Kofi's arm, her eyes pleading with him to turn back. Quaim, standing tall but visibly shaken, clenched his fists tightly, as if bracing himself for an unseen blow. Finally, Quaim stepped forward, his shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. "I will speak first," he said, his voice trembling. He took a deep breath, the words catching in his throat before spilling out in a flood of guilt and shame. "Years ago, before Nia was born, our farm was failing," Quaim began. His eyes, usually strong and unwavering, brimmed with tears. "The drought had destroyed our crops, and we were drowning in debt. I had borrowed money from the village elder, hoping the rains would come and save us. But they didn't. And when I couldn't repay him, I turned to darker means." Emma's gasp cut through the air like a knife, but Quaim pressed on. "Desperation led me to seek out a practitioner of forbidden magic. I begged him to help save our farm, to ensure that our family would not be ruined. He agreed, but his price." Quaim's voice broke, and he fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't understand what I was agreeing to. He demanded the spirit of my unborn child in exchange for prosperity. I thought it was just words, a meaningless ritual. I didn't know." "You didn't know it would take Nea," Amma finished, her voice shaking with a mix of rage and heartbreak. She staggered backward, her hands flying to her mouth as if to contain the scream building within her. "You brought this curse upon us. You gave our daughter to the spirits." Quaim couldn't meet her gaze. "I thought the debt was forgotten. I thought the spirits would never claim what was promised. I was wrong." Amma turned away, her body trembling as silent tears streamed down her cheeks. Kofi, shaken to his core, stepped forward, his voice breaking the tense silence. "I have my own guilt to bear," he said, his tone barely above a whisper. He swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he looked down at the glowing water. "The night Nia disappeared, I was supposed to watch her. Mama had asked me to keep her safe, and I promised I would. But I got distracted." Kofi's voice cracked as he continued. "There was a girl I liked, a girl I wanted to impress. I saw her at the festival and left Nia to play alone while I went to talk to her. I thought she'd be fine. I thought nothing could happen to her in the middle of the festival." He turned to his mother, tears streaming down his face. "I was wrong. I failed her. I failed you." Emma's heart broke anew as she watched her son crumble under the weight of his guilt. She reached for him, pulling him into an embrace despite the anguish that gripped her. "Oh, Kofi," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You were just a boy. It wasn't your fault." "But it feels like it was," Kofi said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. Every day since that night, I've carried this weight. I've hated myself for not being there when she needed me most. The woman in the mist watched silently, her glowing eyes unblinking. She finally turned to Alma, who stood holding her son tightly. "And you, Alma Adwale," the woman said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "What truth do you hide?" Alma froze, her breath catching in her throat. She slowly released Kofi, stepping forward with trembling hands. Her gaze remained fixed on the ground as she spoke. "When Nea was born," she began, her voice barely audible, "I was angry. Not at her, but at Quaim. I blamed him for everything, for our struggles, for the constant uncertainty. I said things to him, things I regretted later." She looked up, her eyes meeting Quaim's for the first time since his confession. "And when Nea disappeared, part of me blamed you," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I carried that anger silently for years, letting it fester. I told myself it was your fault because it was easier than facing my own helplessness. And I see now how that anger has poisoned us all." The family stood in stunned silence, their secrets laid bare under the watchful gaze of the glowing woman. The river began to churn violently, its unnatural glow intensifying as their confessions echoed into the night. The water's surface seemed to boil, casting eerie patterns of light across their faces. The woman raised her hand, and the river stilled instantly. "The truth is now laid bare," she said, her voice resonating with finality. "But the price has not yet been paid. Prepare yourselves." Her words sent a chill down their spines. Kofi stepped forward, his fear giving way to determination. "What price?" he asked. "What more do you want from us?" The woman's gaze settled on him, and for a moment, a flicker of sadness crossed her face. "The price for the truth is always the same," she said. "Sacrifice. To gain what you seek, something must be lost. Are you willing to pay that price?" Quaim stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "Take me," he said. "If a sacrifice is needed, take me. Spare my family." The woman shook her head slowly. "It is not for you to decide, Quaim Adwale. The river will choose." The water began to ripple again, the glow intensifying until it was almost blinding. The family shielded their eyes, their hearts pounding as they waited for the river's judgment. When the light finally dimmed, the woman spoke one last time. "Step into the water," she said, "and you will see." The river of echoes churned violently, its shimmering waters splitting down the middle as if commanded by an unseen force. Light and shadow spiraled upward, intertwining into a vortex that radiated an otherworldly energy. The Adwale family stood frozen, their breath caught in their throats as a figure began to emerge from the depths of the parted river. It was a young woman, her form ethereal and illuminated by the river's glow. Her features were hauntingly familiar, the curve of her jaw, the delicate slope of her nose, the soft curls framing her face. But her eyes, they glowed with an intensity that made Amma's knees buckle. "Nea," Kofi whispered, his voice trembling as he stepped forward. He barely felt Amma's hand gripping his arm, trying to hold him back. "Is it really you?" The figure stepped closer, her movements graceful yet unnatural, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. Her gaze locked onto Kofi, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of recognition seemed to cross her face. But then her expression hardened, her voice cold and cutting. "You left me," she said, her tone devoid of warmth. The words struck Kofi like a blow to the chest. "You promised to protect me, but you weren't there." Kofi fell to his knees, his torch clattering to the ground as tears streamed down his face. "I know," he choked out, his voice breaking. "I know, Nea. And I have carried that guilt every single day. I was a fool. I should have stayed with you. If I could trade my life for yours, I would. I'm so sorry. Naya's glowing eyes flicked to Quaim, her voice dripping with bitterness. And you, she said, her gaze sharp as a blade. You made a deal with the spirits. You promised them my soul before I was even born. How could you do this to me, Father? Quaim's legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed to the ground, his hands clutching the earth as if it could anchor him. I was desperate, he said, his voice a broken whisper. I thought I was saving our family. I didn't know it would come to this. I thought it was just a ritual, meaningless words. Naya, I was blind. I would give anything to undo what I've done. His shoulders heaved as he sobbed openly, the weight of his actions crushing him. Alma turned to him, her own tears falling freely, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. The pain in her chest was unbearable, her heart torn between anger and sorrow. Naya's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. You all failed me, she said, her gaze sweeping over her family. You who were supposed to love me, to protect me. I was just a child. And yet, she paused, her glowing eyes dimming momentarily. You've come seeking the truth. That counts for something. But the spirits demand balance. A debt must be paid. Alma, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Her hands trembled as she reached out toward her daughter. Naya, please, she whispered. We never stopped loving you. We never stopped searching for you. Whatever the price, let it be mine. Take me if that's what it takes to bring you peace. Naya turned her gaze to Alma, her eyes unreadable. For a moment, the glow softened, and her voice lost its edge. Mother, she said, her tone quieter. Your anger has been a burden you've carried for years. You think sacrificing yourself will make things right, but it won't erase what's been done. Alma's knees gave way, and she sank to the ground, her tears soaking the earth. I've blamed your father, she said, her voice breaking. I blamed myself. I've held on to so much pain, thinking it was the only way to honor you. But I see now, it's only hurt us more. The river began to ripple again, its glow intensifying as the woman in the mist stepped forward. Her voice, calm yet commanding, cut through the family's anguish. The spirits have heard your confessions. They have seen the truth in your hearts. But the balance must still be restored. What does that mean? Kofi asked, his voice rising with desperation. What more do you want from us? The woman gestured toward Naya, who stepped closer, her ethereal glow illuminating the tears that now streamed down her own face. The spirits demand sacrifice, the woman said. But the form it takes is up to you. Quaim staggered to his feet, his face streaked with tears. Take me, he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. Let my life be the price. Spare my family any more pain. No, Alma cried, reaching for him. Quaim, don't do this. We've already lost so much. I failed her, Quaim said, turning to face his wife and son. This is my debt to pay. Let me make it right. The woman shook her head slowly. It is not for you to decide, Quaim Adwell. The choice belongs to the spirits. The family stood in tense silence as the river began to churn violently once more. Light and shadow danced across the surface, forming shapes that seemed to twist and writhe with life. The vortex grew brighter, its energy radiating outward until it was nearly blinding. Then, just as suddenly, the light dimmed and the river grew still. Nay stepped forward, her glowing eyes fixed on her family. The spirits have spoken, she said, her voice steady. The debt will be paid, but not in the way you expect. She turned to Kofi, her expression softening. You carry the guilt of that night, but it was never yours to bear alone. Let go of it, Kofi. Live your life without this weight. That is my gift to you. Her gaze shifted to Alma and Quaim. "You must forgive each other," she said. "The anger you've held onto has only fed the darkness. Let it go and honor me by finding peace." Finally, Nea stepped back toward the river, her form beginning to fade. "The spirits have claimed what was promised," she said, her voice growing faint. "But they have also granted mercy. To not waste it." The family reached out, desperate to hold on to her, but Nea vanished into the river's glow, leaving only silence in her wake. The river's light dimmed, returning to its natural state, as if the events of the night had never happened. The Aduales stood at the edge of the river, their hearts heavy but their burdens lighter. The truth had been revealed, and though the pain remained, it was no longer a weight that would crush them. Together, they began the long walk home, their steps filled with a promise of healing and the memory of a daughter who had given them one final gift, a chance to move forward. The river of echoes remained still, the silence broken only by the faint hum of its supernatural glow. The woman in the mist stepped forward, her presence commanding. Her voice, soft but firm, echoed across the riverbank. "The spirits demand balance," she said, her glowing eyes meeting those of the Aduale family. "One life must be given in exchange for Nea's freedom. Choose wisely." The words hung in the air like a blade, cutting through the fragile hope the family had clung to. Quain was the first to move. He stepped forward with a firm resolve, his shoulders squared as he faced the glowing figure. "Take me," he said, his voice steady despite the tears that streaked his face. "I caused this. I made the deal. Let me pay the price." "No," Kofe interrupted, his voice rising with urgency. He stepped beside his father, his hands trembling but his tone unwavering. "It's my fault too. I was supposed to protect her that night. I left her alone. Take me instead." Before either man could act, Amma stepped between them. Her presence was calm but commanding, her voice steady as she spoke. "Enough," she said, her tone carrying the weight of years of pain and sacrifice. "This family has suffered enough. I am the mother. I brought her into this world, and I will take her place." Quain's eyes widened, his voice breaking as he reached for her. "Amma, no, you can't do this. Please don't." But Amma turned to him, her gaze filled with a love so deep it brought him to his knees. "Quain," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion, "you've carried this burden for too long. I see it in your eyes every day, the guilt, the regret. Let me take it from you." She turned to Kofi, her expression tender. "My son," she said, her voice breaking, "you've grown into a man I am so proud of. You've spent your life punishing yourself for something you couldn't control. Let that guilt go. Live your life, Kofi. Be happy." Kofi's legs gave out, and he sank to the ground, his tears flowing freely. "Mama, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Don't do this. We can find another way." Amma knelt before him, cupping his face in her hands. "There is no other way," she said gently. "This is the path we've been given. Take care of each other, and never forget Nea." Before anyone could stop her, Amma rose to her feet and stepped toward the vortex of light and shadow. The air around her seemed to hum with energy as she approached the glowing woman. Quaim and Kofe cried out, their voices desperate, but Amma didn't falter. She glanced back at them one last time, her eyes filled with love and determination. As she stepped into the vortex, the light enveloped her, and the river roared with an unearthly power. The swirling waters rose like walls around her, and the family's cries were drowned out by the deafening sound of the spirits claiming their due. Hama's figure became a silhouette, then faded entirely into the light. And then silence. The river calmed, its glow dimming to a faint shimmer. From the center of the still waters, a figure emerged. It was Nea, her form no longer ethereal but solid and real. Her eyes, once glowing with an unnatural light, were now those of a young woman. A daughter returned to her family. Kofi scrambled to his feet, rushing forward to catch her as she stumbled onto the riverbank. "Nah," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. He held her tightly, his tears soaking into her hair. "You're here. You're really here." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion and sorrow. "Mama," she whispered. "Where's Mama?" Quaim approached slowly, his face etched with grief. He knelt beside them, his hands trembling as he touched Nea's face, as if to confirm she was real. She gave herself for you," he said, his voice barely audible. "She loved you more than anything." Nea's tears fell freely as she clung to her brother and father. The glowing woman stood at the edge of the river, watching silently. Finally, she spoke, her tone softer now. "The debt is paid," she said. "Your mother's love has set you free. Carry her sacrifice with you and honor her by living." Kofi looked up at the woman, his face a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "Why did it have to be her?" he asked, his voice raw. "Why couldn't it have been me?" "The spirits do not seek punishment," the woman replied. "They seek balance. Your mother's heart was the purest among you. Her sacrifice was an act of love, not of guilt. That love is what saved Nea." The woman turned, her form beginning to fade into the mist. "Remember her," she said, "and let her memory guide you." As she disappeared, the river's glow faded completely, and the night became still. The Aduel family stood together, their hearts heavy with loss, but filled with a quiet strength. Nea, though shaken, leaned against her brother for support. "We'll make it," Kofi said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "We'll honor her. Together." Quain placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his grip firm. "Your mother was the strongest person I've ever known," he said. "She would want us to live, to heal." The family began the long walk back to the village, the memory of Amma's sacrifice lighting their way. Though their hearts ached, they carried with them the hope of a new beginning, a life shaped by love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond of family. The journey back to the village was slow, the weight of Amma's absence pressing heavily on Kofi and Quain. Nea, now tangible and whole, walked between them, her steps unsteady, as if adjusting to the sensation of earth beneath her feet once more. The forest, which had once seemed alive with whispers and shadows, now felt strangely quiet, as though it too mourned the loss of Amma. Kofi kept a protective hand on Nea's shoulder, glancing at her every few steps, as though afraid she might vanish again. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Nea didn't answer immediately. Her eyes darted to the trees around them, her expression distant. "It feels strange," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper, "like I don't belong here anymore." Quain stopped and turned to her, his face etched with pain and determination. "You do belong," he said firmly. "This is your home. Your family." Nea looked up at her father, her lips trembling. "But Mama." "She gave everything to bring you back," Quaim interrupted gently. "Her love is what saved you. And it's our duty now to honor that sacrifice by living the life she wanted for us." Nea nodded slowly, but her tears betrayed the turmoil within her. Kofi tightened his grip on her shoulder, his own tears threatening to fall. "We'll get through this together," he said. "I promise." When the family finally emerged from the forest, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a golden light over the village of Nkabia. The familiar sights and sounds of home brought a fleeting sense of comfort, but it wasn't long before the villagers noticed their return. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as people gathered, their faces a mixture of astonishment and curiosity. "Is that Naya?" One woman whispered, clutching her child to her side. "It can't be," said another, shaking his head in disbelief. She was gone for 12 years. But as the crowd drew closer, their whispers turned to exclamations of awe. Naya stood silently, her head bowed, while Quaim and Kofi shielded her from the pressing crowd. The village elder, a stooped man with a cane carved from baobab wood, stepped forward. His cloudy eyes studied Nia intently before shifting to Quaim. "What happened?" he asked, his voice both curious and reverent. Quaim hesitated, his throat tight with emotion. "We faced the spirits," he said at last. "And Amma. Amma gave her life to bring Nia back to us." A hush fell over the crowd, the gravity of his words sinking in. The elder nodded solemnly. "Amma was a remarkable woman," he said. "Her love for her family was unmatched. She will be remembered as a hero in this village." The villagers murmured their agreement, their faces reflecting a mix of sorrow and respect. One by one, they stepped forward to embrace the family, offering words of comfort and support. Though the pain of loss still lingered, the warmth of the community provided a glimmer of hope. In the days that followed, the family began to rebuild their lives. Nai struggled to adjust, haunted by the years she had lost and the memories she couldn't fully piece together. There were moments when she withdrew, her gaze fixed on something distant, but Kofi and Quaim were always there to pull her back. Quaim spent his days repairing their home, his hands finding solace in the physical labor. Each nail he hammered, each wall he mended, felt like a step toward healing. Kofi, meanwhile, devoted himself to helping Nia reconnect with the village. He walked with her through the market, reintroduced her to old friends, and told her stories of Amma that brought both laughter and tears. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the family gathered under the baobab tree. It had once been a symbol of darkness, a reminder of their pain, but now it stood as a beacon of hope. On the anniversary of Amma's sacrifice, they lit a lantern and hung it from one of the tree's sprawling branches. The soft glow of the lantern cast long shadows across the ground, its light a tribute to Amma's unwavering love. "She's still with us," Quaim said one evening, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "In every choice we make, in every moment we cherish, she'll always be with us." Naya reached for her father's hand, her grip firm. "I'll make her proud," she said softly. "I'll live the life she gave me." Kofi nodded, his gaze fixed on the lantern. "We all will." The story of the Aidwale family became a legend in Kabia, a tale passed down through generations. It was a reminder of the unseen battles people face and the power of love, truth, and sacrifice. The baobab tree, once shrouded in sorrow, became a place of reflection and hope. Villagers often gathered beneath its branches to share their own stories, finding strength in its shade. And every night, when the wind rustled through the leaves, it carried with it a gentle whisper. Some said it was the voice of the spirits, but the Aidwales knew better. It was Amma, her love transcending even death, reminding them of the promise she had made. Take care of each other. Dear viewers, thank you for diving into this incredible story with us. The Shadow of the Baobab is not only a story about loss and redemption, but also about the strength that family, love, and faith gives. If this story touched you, leave a comment. Write down how you felt, what moments particularly struck a nerve. Maybe you recognized yourself or someone close to you in these characters. Share your thoughts. It is very important for us. Also, if you have your own amazing or touching stories from life, tell them in the comments. Maybe your story will be the basis for the next video. We appreciate every feedback and believe that every story deserves to be heard. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and press the bell so you don't miss out on exciting new stories. And remember, Your support inspires us to create even more stories that resonate with hearts. Thank you for your time and trust. See you in the next video.